Okay, Ben, I overheard, I think it was on one of your last Wednesday shows, you talked about the ongoing conversation that you and Esther have, and it's the conflict between aesthetics and politics. I think you said that there's not enough politics in aesthetics, so you don't like the aesthetics world per se, and there's not enough aesthetics in politics for you to like the political world. That to me really sums up what I think you're about. That is what you're always on about, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to develop a kind of a way of refusing the boxes, those particular two boxes, because they're the most interesting things I can think of. But it frustrates me that they're very rarely discussed together. People seem to think that they are actually different zones, and that if you want art, go to an artist. If you want politics, go to a politician. Now, exactly those kind of artists and politicians, I think, are the wrong people to go to anything for. That the really interesting people are trying to affect society through ways which may not be official politics, but which are, in fact, political. And that the real art happens around people who are not, don't have their names kind of sprayed up as artists, because once you're a famous artist, it's kind of everybody already knows what you do, and it no longer is really having an aesthetic effect on anybody.
Okay, that's good. So what I want to relate this to, we'll go into this, but I went to page 402 of our class in cleavage, in the last paragraph before the postscript. It's very good. You're talking about print, and I think it relates to this issue of aesthetics and politics. So you're wrapping up your exegesis of Prynne's thing called Not You, correct?
That's right, a pamphlet of poetry which J.H. Prynne issued called Not-You. It's something that his daughter used to say on the phone. He'd pick up the phone, and this is before mobiles, where at least before all children had mobiles, and his daughter would say to him, they had two phones in the house, and it would be somebody phoning up to talk to his daughter, and she'd say to him, "Not you, Daddy," meaning put down the phone and let me talk to this boy.
Yes.
So
okay.
yeah,
that's neat. Does he spell that out in the poem?
No, not at all. You never. That's gossip I'm giving you.
Okay, that's the oral culture, the oral behind the print. You know, that's the hidden discussion that you had with Jeremy. He told you that.
I think I got it from someone else, but it's
okay.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Okay, here's what the last paragraph says. This is the mundane function of the ball bearing in italics, the chrome spheroid whose resistance to outside forces makes it a pivotal asset, which Not You actually is. This poetry can no more be claimed, in quotes, by the left than it can be admired by the right. It is a two-faced fistular shoved up the tongue-tied Janus. But polycementicity does not stop with Prynne's bearing in quotes. Such a conclusion is subverted by the homophone bearing, B-A-R-I-N-G. So the first one is B-E-A-R-I-N-G, second one is B-A-R-I-N-G. Then colon, you say, I'm going to read that again. But
look, are you saying that this poet is showing us his testicles?
No.
Well, ball bearing. But, well, you are.
Wait a minute, Ben.
Bob, you are. You're saying that the poet is showing his testicles to us.
Did I say those words?
No, but you're saying ball bearing. Ball is a common English term. I'm not quite sure whether you use it in America to mean the male testicles.
Oh no, we use it as an industrial thing. We don't. I don't know about ball bearing used as a testicle reference. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it normally is. But if you are bearing your balls, this would be exposing yourself, wouldn't it?
Yes. So let's see how that fits. You go, but polycementicity does not stop with Prynne's bearing, B-E-A-R-I-N-G. Such a conclusion is subverted by the homophone bearing, B-A-R-I-N-G. Colon. A naked lunch, the bride stripped bare, the jagged weasel teeth of proletarian revenge and revelation. This ambition twangs and twinkles in Not You's every word. Now here's the final sentence, which is what you are, materialist aesthetics. For materialist aesthetics, each syllable of Prynne is a straight gate through which news of revolution might enter. So there's your mixing of aesthetics and politics, right?
Yeah, and I'm echoing the words of Walter Benjamin. I don't credit him there for...
Oh, you do. I could read his quote.
Do I? I do credit him there. I've forgotten that I did. I'm very proud, actually, of having, in my Frank Zappa book, I use some ideas of Walter Benjamin's without pointing out they're by the great Walter Benjamin. And one particular reviewer kind of ripped it to shreds and complained that I had the most pathetic description of fascism he'd ever heard. And it was because I didn't put the great name in, but actually exposed him with what the idea was, that he found it so horrendous. I was saying that fascism is about is more to do with property values than anything else. Thus getting rid of the whole liberal scare about evil and not going that way, but saying that unless you understand that fascism is what gives the masses the feeling of revolution without giving them the right to alter property values, unless you understand that, you don't understand fascism. And he found this idea so soulless and mechanical and wrong, and denounced me for it. And what was lovely was he was denouncing, of course, the great Walter Benjamin without knowing it.
Did he find that out?
I think I might have pointed it out to him at some point, but yeah.
Okay, so let's quote from Benjamin, because you end, it's footnote 515.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
Because I'm be an important quote. So this is 1940, it seems to be, when he wrote this. That's the year he died, I think.
Yeah.
Quote, "The time examined by soothsayers in order to ascertain what it had in store for them was not empty or homogeneous. Anyone who keeps this in focus will grasp how past time is experienced in remembering, namely as neither empty nor homogeneous. It's well known that the Jews were forbidden from investigating the future. However, the Torah and prayers instruct them to remember. This stripped the future of its magic," in brackets, "the danger for anyone who turns to soothsayers for information," end of bracket.
That's a good joke in the brackets.
Yeah. But for the Jews, the future was not therefore empty, homogeneous time. Times every second was the straight gate, and that's S-T-R-A-I-T. Times every second was the straight gate through which the Messiah could enter.
In other words, revolution could happen at any point. That we don't... You see, the way that Stalin got rid of revolutionary ideas is he presented a kind of... He set out rules about what the future was going to be for Russian society, and it was the idea that if you work hard, we are slowly building a socialist society, and you work hard and obey who's telling you to work, then eventually we'll transform socialism into communism and it'll all be nirvana. And Walter Benjamin is alerting us to that danger in what people are saying, and saying nobody has the right to make the future stretch out as drudgery in front of us because of some plan. So it's against the 5-year plans and the postponement of happiness in order to have a program of work. And he's pointing out the dangers of people who do that, because who has the right to lay out your life in front of you in that way?
Yeah. So that quote and what you say in the book really crystallizes what I think you're about in the last 11 or 12 shows, however many we've done.
This is number 13.
Number 13?
Yeah, we're on 13.
Okay, what's interesting is that's why we're talking politics, and then you don't like any of the political bureaucracies of the Socialist Party and that, and you bring in Zappa to them. So there you are, bringing aesthetics into politics. And then you, I guess, confront Jeremy Prynne or anybody in the aesthetics world, and you say, well, why aren't you out in the streets with us and this thing? So you're oscillating back and forth. And that is the essence of what you're doing. And so I have a subnote here. You like neither in their proper contexts. They should overlap. And
because I think
that explains your thinking.
The proper context is, for me, a straitjacket that simply allows an abominable system to carry on.
Right. Now, this is McLuhan's point. That's what McLuhan would agree with this bent. The bent, B-E-N with a T. T for time, I guess. like we could talk about a Zappa song, and that would mean everything to you. Yet we're trying to start a revolution or to carry on some revolution that's been going on and just jump in front of it and claim that we understand it and then divert it or move it into some other place or just take it over and edit the London Times or something. Or Samizdat. This is the crux of the matter. And when I bring in tactility, and then you talk about the interplay of Wyndham Lewis and Joyce, this is it. This is what Lewis would shift into politics and complain about Joyce's nostalgia for Dublin and his obsolete aesthetics. And then Joyce might somehow be political, and then Lewis will say, no, aesthetics is where it's at. There's Shem and Sean. The way they jump back and forth on it. This is now the interplay of that is what we're calling the tactile interval. And you call it dialectics.
That's true.
What?
That's true, yeah, I call it dialectics, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying one of McLuhan's point was, he would say, I agree with Ben, but does Ben understand that our environment we live in, this amazing digital technological matrix, operates on that oscillation between aesthetics and politics and played off one to the other and changes the context. That is what McLuhan said Joyce was warning us by playing it out right in front of us on the page, the problem, the situation, and how modern technologies made it really difficult even to determine what you wanted, what you and Esther wanted, if you got what you wanted. That's what I'm thinking about.
Well, we don't believe we only exist in the media. There's a whole onslaught of what I call postmodernist arguments. Probably the most popular one in America would be Jean Baudrillard, arguing that we only exist in our representations, so that only media is true. Whereas I reverse that completely and say it's my everyday life that's true, that I'm mortal, I'm not going to live forever unlike you, and therefore each moment of my actual life is the real thing, and I'm being bothered by all this other stuff that leads people to
bothered, yes,
and leads people to believe that it's more real than they are, which is why people want to commit suicide when they hear Michael Jackson's died. Or, I mean, that's just the most recent example to kind of strike me. But,
yeah.
And so we're trying to inject into media a counter-virus to that, something that could wake people up to their everyday lives as more important, which is why we abhor the star system, because the star system suppresses people's own creativity and belief in themselves, and I want everybody to be you-centered. I want people to go out from themselves, and this is why I found Danny Houston so inspiring, because when I wrote my Zappa book, I dedicated it to my true gurus who taught me the book, and one was J.H. Prynne, which everybody who reads my book gets very interested, or not everybody, but people who get interested in my book follow up J.H. Prynne, but nobody seems to follow up Danny Houston or ask me about him. And Danny would spend his whole time rather like you do, Bob, because you remind, your effect on me is rather like Danny's effect on me. He always related everything back to his own experience in himself. So if he was in a pub and he just glimpsed on the TV screen a picture of a rabbit, he would be very serious about noting that a rabbit is on the TV screen and that he'd visited a friend who had a rabbit today. He'd bring everything back to his own experience. Now, in a way, analytically, if you want to analyse media, that approach would sound ridiculous or mad. But he's actually speaking for the particular person being generalised by the media, which is why generalisations about the media are so unsatisfactory, because nobody is actually generalised, everybody is specific. And Plato defined dialectics as the correct way of going from the one to the many. So what I'm doing is a dialectical exposition, pointing out that everybody is unique. The means of communication we have are a generality, but finding the correct relationship of those is the key to having a philosophy that could change everything.
Yeah, it's, if you could say that Baudrillard takes McLuhan's point of the medium as a message and they extend it. they don't know, Baudrillard and them don't know that the other law that McLuhan presented is the Danny Houston point. McLuhan said the user of the media is the content. And Danny recognized that. And that's all it can be. The content is you.
Yeah, having brought forward the example of Danny, I understand the user as the content rather better. Because I'm thinking about when my girlfriend, my previous girlfriend, visited Jerry Fiolka in Los Angeles when Jerry was answering the phone for the Frank Zappa organization, wormed his way into the Frank Zappa organization. This was just before Frank died. She walked into Jerry's apartment and just said, I felt completely at home. I was at Danny's. Because Jerry, who is he's the person who told me about you and is the link between us, the first link between us, operated in exactly the same way as Danny, which is noticing everything about media that was interesting, turned him on in a subjective way that he wanted to pursue. So everything got collected, everything got exhibited, everything got placed within his tiny places these two guys live, because all this activity actually doesn't tend to make you any money. So these people tend to be living from hand to mouth, utterly obsessed with what the media is doing, and yet building a cocoon for themselves which is entirely personal. And this is, for me, just true hipster living in the 20th or 21st century. It's really making use of all this stuff that's around us. And so I'd be looking at, in Danny's room and look up and there'd be a blue-tacked a ticket for going to see Howlin' Wolf many years ago when he went to see him. And I'd always heard that Captain Beefheart, his voice was influenced by Howlin' Wolf. And these things were just combined so that he's like playing all his experiences and these fragments of stuff like inventing a complete environment to live in, which is a counter environment to the boring self-evidence of everything outside that room. So these are magic chambers that people can create.
Yes, your friend went there in 93. Zappa dies in late 93, so it was there 93, 94, early 94. Carol and I had lived in Zappa and Fialka's place from February to August that year. And you can go on fivebody.com and see footage. Jerry, in the evening, after he came home working for Frank, he would interview me. We've got many little videotapes of that in the 95, 96, 1995, 1996 timeline. If you want to see Jerry's apartment, you can go on my website and or go to Jerry, the timeline and see that.
Jerry actually got there. He got to the point where he was talking to Frank and working for him and everything. And Danny was aiming that way. That's what he wanted to achieve. But the whole thing is, you're one fan and you go to the Hammersmith Odeon in Britain and you've got like thousands of people who are all going Frank, Frank, Frank. And it seemed terribly hard for us to get through. How can we get through to him? And I used to expound my interpretations of one size fits all and the sofa and its hidden meanings and its relationship to the poetry of J.H. Prynne. And we get very excited and very drunk together. And I remember Danny turning to his friend Mick Sashadic and just saying, how are we going to get Ben to talk to Frank? We've got to get them in touch. We've got to get this, and we were kind of plotting our way through, like any fan in a way. We wanted to stalk Frank. We wanted to get closer to this thing that we found so exciting. So
but that was 13 years before you actually got to him, right?
That's right. And if I'd had a little bit more money, I'd have paid for Danny to have gone with me, and I really regret the fact that I went on my own rather than with him. We did interview Dweezil and Ahmet together, but we didn't manage to convince them that we were anything special at all.
You know how Jerry got into Zappa? He went through the media too. He had his film place in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan or whatever was there in Ann Arbor, and he's part of the Counterculture Film Society. He would bring in film, so he brought in Baby Snakes And so that was something that, you know, Gail, whoever he spoke to, would think, oh, he's working for Frank. And so when he went to L.A. in 1980, he called up and they remembered him, and that's how they said, well, come over and help for a while. You know, and he worked for a short time in 1980, but didn't go back till 1984. But that's what you have to do. You have to have a media prop to get access, right?
That's true. Yeah.
You had a book. You're writing a book, so of course you can get in.
Yeah, well, it didn't feel, of course. I mean, Zappa had fallen out with David Wally, his first and probably best biographer, and since then all the books were unofficial and derided, and he published the real Frank Zappa book saying there are all these books that purport to be about me. He also expressed extreme dislike of New Musical Express journalists. NME was the newspaper that you read if you were thoughtful about rock music, and
yes.
They'd invented punk, and in many ways Charles Shaw Murray, who coined the term punk, the writer who first came up with the Oz, he wrote in the School Kids issue of Oz, which was a big scandal in Britain in 71, I think it was, and Charles Shaw Murray kind of presented punk to Frank was a kind of like, look what we've achieved, Frank, you were against the hippies, we've really got something against the hippies going on here. And Frank turned around and was absolutely disinterested and just said that punk is just the new fashion and attacked it, and they were so disappointed. There was a cartoon by Savage Pencil who had a strip in Sounds, a rival music magazine to New Musical Express, to NME, and it's a cartoon I've always treasured, and it's a picture of someone watching Frank doing this sort of put down of punk on TV and going, why have I supported this complete idiot for so many years? And then a little reminiscence, I ran behind the Mothers of Invention tour bus in 1969 for 15 city blocks, and there's a cartoon of Jimmy Carl Black and co sort of looking, going, who is that guy running behind them on the coach? And I even bumped into him in a bar in LA and mumbled something to him, and why have I been supporting this complete prat for so long? Worst thing is, it's got to be a habit. And it's like he's saying, even despite Frank's awful stuff on punk, and he's so out of touch and wrong, he still can't help being obsessed with him. And this strip has always remained with me, but it might help to explain how I was quite fearful going and talking to Frank as someone English who was a music writer. You know, we seem to be targets of abuse. I mean, Pack Our Goose is a song written against people like myself, so it wasn't kind of like, oh, I've got a book contract, Frank will give you an easy ride straight away. You know, it was like I sent them texts which were to do with Shakespeare and Frank, and did an analysis of King Lear and its relationship to the Nanook song that begins the Apostrophe album, and they read it and thought they found it very funny. And Gail faxed me back and said, when faxes seemed quite a new mode of communication, and that was rather strange in itself, saying that they'd read it and found it hilarious and they'd love to talk to me, but that Frank himself had no time for the bard, but she had a little more time for him. And so it was the kind of lunacy of my analysis that appealed to them, rather than the seriousness of my biographical, sleuthing.
No, you hit this is all because of Gail. I don't even know if Frank knew about it. Gail fancies herself to be well-read and wants to be educated in the literate sense, and you hit the right thing for her. Right. I bet you she just told Frank about it, and she was the main avenue here for you.
Yeah, I mean, she rewrote history after Frank's death, which I found very upsetting, and declared she'd always thought it all completely preposterous and had no time for it at all, which was hurt me quite a lot. But there you go, she did that to a lot of people after he died, didn't she?
Yes, well, you said she wrote history? Oh, rewrote history. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, I'd gone up there and been fated. I mean, I'd sat around with Matt Groening there and I've read out my analysis of the cover of Uncle Meat to everybody and got clapped, and Frank shook me by the hand and said, this is fantastic, and it was all just really sweet, and then it all, sort of went rotten as soon as he died.
Yes. Okay, so we're talking the users, the content. Danny and you thought. See, Danny thought that Frank would enjoy your response, because like this other person you're referring to said, the cartoonist, he just mumbled something when he met Frank in the bar in L.A. People don't know what to say to Frank.
Yeah.
Danny knew that you, at least, maybe him too, had something to say.
I think Danny was aware that he was a bit too shy and starstruck to make an impression, but he thought there was something crazoid about me that would make Frank want to make me part of his constellation of loonies. It was Danny who persuaded me to go. He managed to find someone in the audience in the second row, and he'd been to enough of the series of concerts to know there was on-stage participation and dancing on stage. So he got me this position in the second row and said I had to stand up when he asked for people to dance at the Hammersmith Odeon. And so I did. I followed. He was my manager for this particular operation, and so when Frank got people dancing, he'd already got another boy, and he was looking for a girl. And he said to me, "Sit down. You're not a girl." And I said to him, "How can you tell?" And I had very short hair and spiky hair, and it was fairly obvious I was male. And he said, "Well, an answer like that, you better come up." So I got there. But I later found out, and Danny found out, that if you hung around after the gig, you got invited to a party and got to meet the band and meet Frank and all the rest of it. But we didn't know that, so we just skipped off home and stayed up all night listening to Danny's strange music.
Yeah, big mistake.
Yeah.
You should have hung around. That is why I was always able to talk to Frank, or he was interested. I would know if I had met you guys then. I would have said, "No, you can get in. This is how you do it." And you already were doing it. You just had to be heard. You had to say something silly, like you did when you said you weren't a girl or a guy. But so
and there's a book that was very important for me and Danny by Margaret Rothery Sheldon, a society lady, called Breeding from Your Poodle. And it was remaindered, which means, I don't know if you use that word in the States, but it means the book isn't being published at full price anymore. They just try to liquidate the stock, so it appears very cheap in various bookshops, remaindered bookshops. And when we first met, I produced a copy and said, this book is just extraordinary, because it had these crude pictures of cushions of different sizes, useful in allowing poodles of different sizes to mate. And you look at this picture of cushions of different sizes to enable doggy sex, and it's just a very odd book. And he said, "Oh yeah, I've got 4 copies of that." And I said, "Oh, and I've got 5." And of course we'd both gone to the same remaindered bookshop, seen this thing and snapped it up, in order to give to people and so on. And it was, again, Danny who orchestrated getting this passed up on stage and getting it read out from. And again, it's like, well, let's offer Frank some of the kind of surrealistic stuff that he's given us. Let's do it too. And that should be your approach to an artist, is you've got to measure up to them. And one thing it doesn't measure up is going along and going, "I love your work," which they hear from all sorts of people who are insincere anyway. So it doesn't count.
No, that's exactly right. I think I've heard some of these on bootlegs, right? Isn't that on a bootleg or two? You in the audience jumping up, or him reading the book? Yeah.
Those things get passed around.
Okay, so what I wanted to add was that for years, Zappa fanatics, my friend Henry in New York, would take advantage of me being with Frank, and they'd come, and I would say something. You're finally getting the time to talk to Frank, and they wouldn't say anything. They were tongue-tied.
Well, this is the paradox, isn't it?
They all failed because they didn't know that you don't talk about Frank with Frank. Yeah, but you contribute something new.
But you put your finger on one of the real paradoxes of the Frank Zappa thing, which really interests me, which is, I think that Frank is an enabler of a surrealism that happens in your own head, that Frank's stuff should be applied in the way we apply it. You make radio in the spirit of Frank. You use the incongruities and the bizarreness of actually thinking about things as entertainment, as a way of attracting people to what you want to say. I think The Simpsons entirely comes out of somebody who really understood what was good about Frank Zappa. We understand that, and yet, on the other hand, it's like there's a sort of dark shadow of what Frank did. There are all these morons who are so fixated on Frank that they can't talk to each other and build anything or communicate or have fun with it. They're just locked in this slavish collecting facts, the people I call hardcore fans. Now, what if the politics and aesthetics of Frank is so correct, how is it he has this horrible following?
Very good point. Okay, so we've come to the aesthetics versus politics situation.
Well, I was sort of saying that because what I was meaning, when we talk about what Frank is doing to his fans now, well, the reason I like talking about Frank Zappa with you, Bob, is that we've actually transcended the division between aesthetics and politics. Which are we talking about? We're talking about Frank's effect on people, aren't we?
Yes.
And
yes.
Whether it's art or politics, suddenly those silly divisions don't exist anymore, because we're not talking about a commodity or power. We're talking about something that actually happens to us. So why is it, do you think, that there is so often this wrong response to Frank?
I present 4 views of that in my book, Fat at Communion. I present Lyndon LaRouche's explanation of that. I present McLuhan's explanation of that, William Irwin Thompson's explanation, and Arthur Croker's. So, without going into that, but it's always my agenda. I'm explaining why Frank makes people stupid. And I use these other guys who built up a lot of thought about media and modern situation, and I work from there. So, this is the core question.
Yeah.
It's what Dave Wally and I talked about. Dave Wally was appalled at Zappa's audience by the time he did that rewrite in 1980 or so. And this has always been the true Zappa understander. We're not Zappa fans, we're Zappa understanders. You know what I mean? In the sense that we resonate not with the particulars of the obscurity of whatever he wrote about. As a matter of fact...
But is this to do with a turn that he made? I mean, do you think it's true that if you went to a Mothers of Invention concert back in the day, you would meet a lot of like-minded people whose politics and aesthetics were all going in the same groove, and you'd make friends? I mean, people judge musical performance as if it's something happening on stage. Of course, what you're really judging is the social event curated by these people, made to happen, the situation created, and whether you got anything out of it. And in a big city, what we're all looking for is people we can actually talk to, who don't so disagree with our basic ideas that we're always having the same row, that we can actually communicate with. That's what we're looking for. That would be a good time. And I found free improvisation when I was in Leeds as the means of finding people who I could really talk to about music. Do you think that the Mothers of Invention audience, it had that, and that there's a big turn as the 60s fade from sort of 69 onwards, the breakup of the Mothers and different strategies used by Frank to keep his project afloat, the introduction of vaudeville with Flo and Eddie, the glossy nature of overnight sensation, the stripping things down, and so on, and the kind of dubious element of the whole 80s teen rock, which is sort of done tongue-in-cheek and allows him to build massive musical structures which are frightening and unlike any other music I've ever heard. But at the same time, there's a kind of a sort of irony in it, which is giving people a kind of, they expect to get a feast and they're getting a turd, and this is part of the joke, and you have to be sophisticated enough to know what's going on.
No, the Mothers of Invention period, and I was there. The first person to talk about Frank and the Mothers was David Wally, and Miles a little bit, but Dave Wally thought about it because he graduated from Yale or something, and he was a cultural historian, so he had a bit of perspective. Miles was just a guy on the scene, right, and had access to Frank. But Wally thought about it, and there was no Frank Zappa in the late 60s. Nobody thought about him. It was just all projected on this guy who ate dung, or something. It wasn't until the 70s you even could begin to talk to anybody. And Dave Wally, when he wrote about Zappa and Jazzbot, he had to battle everybody that he was even writing about Frank. So there was no audience for Frank the artist, and there was no talking about Frank. I found nobody who would talk about Frank. They didn't even know who he was. And those are people in the counterculture.
I mean, I was aware of We're Only In It For The Money in my older brother's student milieu in Durham University. I remember We're Only In It For The Money being on the turntable, and it was like a scene from the Furry Freak Brothers, exactly that period of time. And anybody who read the counterculture magazines and grew their hair and smoked some marijuana was sort of in this bubble. And that was one of the Premier Records. It was this record, you put it on, it sounded, my mother said, it sounded like someone was changing the record in the middle of the record playing, which if she'd known her Brecht and Benjamin, she would have thought was a very good thing, but she was just sort of disturbed by it. So, the Mothers of Invention did have they were big. I mean, the whole emphasis on Frank, which I find nightmarish. I mean, I've woken up at Didier Mervelet's spare flat in Paris, screaming in the middle of the night, and I have my hand over a poster of Frank over his face, and I find his use of his own visage all the time in the late records a kind of incredibly tiresome and boring. I don't find staring at Frank's face very interesting. I'd rather look at a vacuum cleaner. I'd rather look at a Kalshenko concoction. I'd rather look at something really interesting, and I find that use of his face and the ending up calling it Zappa record, just Zappa, just kind of awful.
Yeah, no, people did not know Frank until the later 70s. He didn't stand out. He was part of a wacky group that made great stuff for stone people, and then they weren't there anymore. The Mothers disappeared. They didn't even know why, and then they went on to Mott the Hoople and all the rest of it.
But this reminds me of...
And Frank never showed up till the late 70s, where people go, oh my God, that guy, you hear him play guitar. I just happened to go to a concert, didn't even know what I was going to. It's not, Frank doesn't really, as an artist himself, he's later.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of listening to a recording of Jimi Hendrix at the Royal Albert Hall in 1967 or 8, and one of those posthumous live releases. I mean, are you aware of the huge wealth of live Jimi Hendrix? That it's just amazing stuff. It's Coltrane. It's just, you listen to whole concerts and you can't remember a single song, a single lyric. It's just guitar. It's just 2 hours of guitar. I mean, this is just amazing stuff.
No, I'm aware of it. I've heard some of it. Not a lot, but I've heard some.
But at this concert, he comes on, and it's not everybody going Hendrix and adulation. He comes on, the band come on, everybody's talking in the audience, and he says, hey, hello people, this Sunday afternoon we'll try and get some music together for the action or something. And he's saying the event is already happening and he's supplying the music for it. That something's going on in the audience which is so exciting for themselves and what's happening with them, that the musical is sort of a musical sideshow is happening, which Hendrix is all involved with. But the commodification that has happened since on Hendrix would make you lead to expect, here is the greatest guitar player there's ever been, and the greatest electric guitar player there ever been, and Frank notwithstanding, I believe that. You'd have thought they'd all be like, shouting his name and adulating him, but that's all the commodification that happened after the counterculture finished, which was the dredgification of that counterculture.
Yeah, the Zappa used the phrase audio wallpaper. So Zappa and the Mothers were wallpaper for a larger social phenomenon that was going on. When that died.
Well, I think the wallpaper got pretty good.
Let me finish. The wallpaper then was sold. That's what you call commodification.
Yeah.
The wallpaper became figure, and everybody got into remembering the wallpaper. But they didn't notice the wallpaper when they were growing up in the late 60s and all involved in their identity.
Yeah.
And their revolution, or whatever that generation thought they were doing. So Frank, perfect timing, he disbanded the Mothers, this is amazing, he disbanded them in September 69, just as Woodstock is really the death knell, but everybody thinks it's the beginning, but then they found out that Woodstock was the death knell with Altamont, which happens a couple months later. Zappa was tuned in, he announced it was over before it became over.
And what he did, though, and this was really when I was researching Zappa in the light of J.H. Prynne, and why I thought he was a kind of chromium sphere, like a ball bearing in a pivot, was he decided to go and create artworks. And I heard that and I recognized it. Now, Carl Dallas, who's a liberal political music writer, denounced Zappa for selling out, that he disbanded the Mothers and gone commercial. But I noticed something else going on, that Frank was actually doing all he could do as a composer, which is to craft musical objects which you can ponder and get things from, which can alter and deepen your understanding of the society we're in. So he very deliberately, it seemed to me, decided to that the culture he'd been involved with had failed to change the world, and he did what an artist can do. And I defend that and say there's a place for that, and that's my training in Prinian poetics, who believes still that a crafted piece of art can do a job. Now, you've got to be very clear that that doesn't mean the art world, and it doesn't mean the people who shower artists with money, or the whole system of making money from art. It's a completely different thing. You're talking about the art objects that are worthy of our consideration. And Zappa decided to issue those, and I found them flawless. Each time I bought a Frank Zappa album from the 70s onwards, when I started buying them as they came out, and they were the only records I paid full price for. Everything else was second-hand, apart from Devo, who I liked as well. I found, first of all, I never liked it when I first heard it, because it totally altered what previously I'd liked about a previous record. I had to do work on it in order to like it. It always used things whose associations I didn't agree with and I didn't like, and the whole thing of not liking as part of the artistic experience. And so that was what I felt Frank could do. Now, does this relate to McLuhan and his aestheticism, or is this just a Prinian idea, or is that how you perceive it? I mean, do we get on with each other because we're in fact pursuing high aesthetics in the realm of mass culture?
Okay, I had the exact reaction to every album, same as yours. I didn't like it, but it was a bit different because I had more access to them than you did, so I saw what was coming. But the albums always were not totally ecstatic. It was interesting, new, good parts, but then what was this ridiculous other part? But then you'd later like the ridiculous part or something. Better. But the thing is that what nobody realized till maybe your book came out, that the mothers were an art object by Frank. Nobody had a clue about that when the mothers were running around. I don't know if the mothers ever figured it out. Maybe Don Preston did. They never understood that Frank was already the central scrutinizer behind the thing. And that didn't. And so then the Turtles was an art object. He shifted the art objects. And that would be exactly McLuhan's point, because every 18 months, which was the term Zappa used for trend change, trend shifting, under electric speeds, McLuhan would say, of course things are totally different every 18 months, and the artist has to drop what he was doing and get tuned in and figure out his response or anti-environment to what was happening. So Frank had to be different. There had to be a Turtles phase. There had to be the overnight sensation phase. There had to be the beef art retrieval. There had to be the 77 band, Shake Your Booty, and all that. That it all is so clinically painted by Zappa. And I don't think anybody, I mean, I knew it, and Frank and I would talk about it, but way back there, I don't know, was there any book? Wally got it. No, Dave Wally did. Very simply presented, but he understood. Wally called it the playing with time. That's what Dave Wally would describe the basic point of Zappa. And he did write about the conceptual continuity, but he didn't get the media textures and the larger, fuller view that you'd get knowing McLuhan. But your book was the first book to look at the art object manipulation theater that Zappa was doing and have the correct references. Wyndham Lewis, Zappa, and Adorno and all that stuff. You missed the McLuhan, but that's why we're talking now.
Yeah, that's true.
The point is, McLuhan would say, even though he recognized that what Zappa was doing could not provide a real anti-environment, even Frank knew that. It's on the first album. Hey, maybe what's that song? We're just here to play. Maybe that's all I'm here. I think it's one of the last songs on the album.
But maybe that's not for me to say. They only pay me here to play. And then you hear a kazoo go.
Like Zappa knew the obsolescence of what he was doing, and that's why he would, in the end, emphasize the user's content. He would say, all this is an extension of me, and that's all it is. And I'm just a guy doing my own thing, and if you resonate with it, okay. But don't bother me with whatever you think I'm doing. It's got nothing to do with you. That is him falling back on his obsolescence, And then that leads to statements that he makes later in the 80s that, quote, the media is all there is. I mean, it's very interesting to look at Frank he's like you, Ben. they didn't know they were spelling out McLuhan. You and Frank didn't know it, but you were doing it right.
Well, I got tons of flack from the hardcore fans of my book because their whole contention was, look, Frank never read Adorno. So what is the point of quoting Adorno? And my reply was always, well, if he had read Adorno, it would be sick. He reads a theorist and decides to try and carry it out. He'd probably carry it out badly. You know, that it doesn't... It's actually because he didn't know Adorno that it proves that both of them are onto something. That it is actually society and the development of society. We're talking about something objective that's happening, and both these people are responding to it in a way in which there are amazing parallels, not because they're influencing each other, but because they're responding to something that's really there.
With the same sensibility, almost. The same method, the same approach. In Adorno, it's interesting, in 69, here's Frank, angry at the student revolution, you know, the famous London School of Economics scene, and Adorno's dropping out too. They both reacted to the emotion of multitude that was going on in the same way. And then Adorno died, but Zappa carried on. And Zappa, I would say, gave up his objections in a certain way. He actually adapted and started satirizing other things. He said, okay, you guys don't have a clue, but 2 years later, he's not even concerned about them. He's talking about the next people. And it's almost like he didn't... It's interesting, I don't think Frank made it. He didn't realize that his art failed in terms, if you judge the audience. The audience became stupid. But Frank said, well, what are we? I'm just here to play. And I make great art, no matter whether my audience can't get it.
When I saw Frank in Newcastle in 1979, I actually brought the concert to a halt with heckling, because he came forward and said, I was with friends who were... One of them I liked, one of them I didn't like, but they were two good friends they were Geordies from Newcastle. And Paul had a whole line that my expectation that Frank should do more abstract music was phony baloney. It was about stupidity. The great thing about Dynamo Hum is it's a stupid song, he'll sing it, we'll all enjoy it. That's what Frank is all about. So Frank came and did his encore, which used to consist of Camarillo Brillo, Dynamo Hum, I've forgotten the third one. It wasn't Muffin Man at that date, but it was Camarillo Brillo, Dynamo Hum. It was always those two, and I got up and just said, Frank, I'm sick of it. You know, I'm sick of, because I'd been listening to live tapes of all the concerts, and it always ended with exactly the same, running through these two numbers faster and faster and more cynically each time. Let's get this shit out the way that the people like, you know. So I was bawling, play something even more stupid, you know, or improvise, you know. You've got all these musicians, why don't you do something? I was trying to be the voice of reason lost among all these people, and he kind of made fun of me and who's pulling your chain. And of course, with the imbalance of PA systems, you cannot argue. And you can hear me going, oh no, he's going to play it, and you know, because I was taping it myself, so I have a recording with the balance around the other way.
I've heard that on a bootleg, right?
Yeah,
I would have heard that.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
And that was, I was very depressed that night because Frank had done this kind of cynical, crowd-pleasing, you know, and it's all built into Dynamo Hum. I mean, Dynamo Hum is about a kind of machinic going round and round, a kind of reducing everything to the most sort of mechanical, stupid
let me say something here. Yeah, first of all, Dynamo Hum is mentioned in the booklet for Uncle Meat, right? So he's following from the concept inside the booklet. All right.
Yeah, at the end of he says it as a kind of like a.
Let me just say this. Yeah. The other thing is that you yelling back at the Dynamo Hum machine, which Zappa was miming, was the same, and the sort of aware of the futility of it. Zappa had the same sense of futility as he looked at the media spectacle himself. He was Ben Watson or out to lunch in that case, in relation to the media environment, and would sort of not worry about it.
Yeah, but I didn't get through to him. I mean, he didn't say, hey, let that guy come up here and let's hear what he says. And yeah, you'd like me to cover Out to Lunch by Eric Dolphy? Yeah, let's do that instead of this rubbish. I mean, we didn't get that.
Well, so Frank didn't get to be president.
But then I do remember at Hammersmith Odeon where there was a moment where he suddenly said, enough showbiz, and got El Shankar on stage, and they did Pound for a Brown really seriously, like for a 20-minute encore. And you can hear me on the tape going, it's a golden day. So, you know.
Well, the thing is that that's what was great about Frank. You never knew what he was going to do, and there may be reasons. He had to go do something, and he didn't have time to tolerate you. But if you'd done it the next night, he might have responded differently. You cannot judge
absolutely.
Frank on one night.
Absolutely. I mean, this is part of the... I mean, the point is to have these rows. It's not winning on any particular night, isn't it? To be aware that the artists are wrestling with the same things we're wrestling with. They aren't these gods which are up in Michael Jackson spectral, maybe existent, maybe not existent kind of zones of Olympian heights way, way above us, but people responding to the society we're all enmeshed in ways in which we can say we agree with this, we don't agree with that, we like this, we don't like that. We have a tussle with them. That's because there are equals. That's who the artists are. They're the sort of few people we can find with who we can respect as other people making this struggle of survival and trying to be happy in this system. And that way seems to me the rational and coherent way of treating the artists that we like rather than worship.
Right. Now the finding people you resonate with, that's the user's content overlapping. But we also, that could be classed under aesthetics. But the politics is dealing with the environment, the larger world, and why do we have to work, and those things you brought up last week. That has to be included. And that's where you start looking at things technically, not your personal preferences. So you slip over to either politics or aesthetics. It's looking at things detached and aesthetically, not users of content. You're looking at the medium as the message. Or is that political? That's where it gets mixed up. And you asked, what did McLuhan... McLuhan drop the aesthetic approach to media in the 60s. He went political, but nobody knew that he was being political, and he anticipated the aestheticization of everything.
Mm-hmm, which we currently suffer from, yeah.
Yeah, and so then that's why... You see, you and Esther talk about, you go slip between aesthetics and politics. Those categories don't even apply now, and that's what we're trying to address, and what I'm trying to get to address.
Well,
that's what
Bob, I don't really agree with you. I mean, if I read a newspaper, I mean, those categories don't apply now, but they maybe shouldn't apply. But I read about Damien Hirst and famous artists in the papers. I read about politicians. You know, these categories are very firm in some people's minds who have pretty powerful positions. I want to undermine them, but I think, you know, that noticing that these two things should be merged isn't something that's already been achieved, and we don't need to. We can just sit on our hands.
You are reading the newspaper. Why are you doing that? Reacting to people who don't have any power. They're temporary fads, whoever they are. You know, you name any columnist that's 10 years ago that you read is not there now. You know, like this is the funny thing, Ben, you live within this media matrix and you get upset about what you're witnessing, yet your aesthetics is, or your response is, I'll ignore all that and just play Howling Wolf or some obscure Italian composer. You know, you oscillate between upset about stuff that, you know, was not important.
Just to make clear,
something that's fascinating you about it. You get fascinated by what's
now, we began with an echo of Walter Benjamin. I'll just make it clear that he did believe in the politicization of aesthetics, the disruption of art for art's sake, by pointing out where the money's going and how it serves society in a very Trotskyist way, actually, who said art is always a social act. But he did not believe in the aestheticization of politics. He thought the aestheticization of politics, making politics beautiful, was simply the Nazi Olympics. It's Leni Riefenstahl, and he absolutely abhorred it. He didn't think that aestheticizing politics was a good idea at all. He did believe in in recognizing the rights of subjectivity, which you could call a kind of aestheticization, but in that formula I just want to make it clear that he sees as Nazi the idea of making our heroes look beautiful and powerful.
Yeah, I don't think you support that. So but what is the revolution, the oscillating between the laws of society as capitalism dictates to your personal user's content response to the media banquet that's available? How do you figure out what you're doing? I don't think you try to work that out anymore. You just respond, and you don't even determine what you're going to respond to. You just
I'm really waiting for the. I try and respond, but I'm really waiting for the people to get in touch with me. It's like raising a little flag above the parapet and waving it around and hoping to attract some other people who might be thinking like me.
And if that happens, are you satisfied to have just a conversation with them? You got a little tribe, a family. Is that enough?
No, we're going to organise them for the revolution, Bob. That's why I'm trying to attract these people. We've got 10 seconds left.
Well, that's what we are. We're the new Marx and Engels.
Absolutely, Bob. And it's a pleasure talking with you.
Pleasure hearing you.
Bye.
Bye.